So yeah, now the clock is 1:15, so I think we can start. So here to talk about TTIP and TAFTA and their impact on free software, we have Lucile Falgueyrac.
Hi everyone, welcome, thank you very much for being there. So when I submitted my talk about TTIP, I was a bit worried that it wouldn't fit in the conference, but I'm really happy because all the talks I've been to today have a link with this thing called TTIP. Be it the talk about surveillance, about copyright, or about full communism. Okay, so TTIP, Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, is also called TAFTA. TAFTA is its first name, and then it got rebranded as TTIP. TAFTA is used in several countries, like in France, or also in the US by people who oppose the deal, because it reminds people of NAFTA and ACTA and all these acronyms ending with A. Sorry?
I think actually it was called ACTA from the beginning if we were going to be serious about it. But I mean, it was called ACTA from the beginning if we were going to be serious about it, but the commissioner just said that, oh no, I'm going to drive this shit through and I'm going to do it another way, so here we have TTIP, TAFTA, etc.
Well, now it's more complicated than that because ACTA was only about what they call intellectual property, while TTIP is much wider. So it's really two different things. And
ACTA was not only, but okay, continue.
The discussions about TTIP started over 10 years ago between both sides of the Atlantic, but the real negotiations started in July 2013. So we're going to see mostly the impact of TTIP on digital rights and free software, but it's kind of impossible to talk about TTIP just on focusing on these points, so I will have to widen the talks at the end. So, So the problem when you talk about TTIP is that it's not coming alone. It's coming with lots of different trade agreements that are everywhere in the world. So TTIP is between Europe and the US. But it's not the only trade agreement that is negotiated right now. There is also a gigantic one in the Pacific that's called the TPP that I'm going to talk about quite a lot. And then there is another one called CETA, which is between Canada and Europe. That is now almost finished. The negotiation is over, and the ratification process will start. And I really think that it's impossible to talk about TTIP without talking about the others, because they all play together. It's a global effort to impose some things that I will explain later. So, what do we know about TTIP? The problem about TTIP and TPP and CETA is that they're negotiated in secret, like ACTA was. So what does it mean that they're negotiating in secret? It means that the negotiating documents are completely confidential. We can't have access to them. Even the parliaments can't have access to them. Right now in the European Parliament, there is a small group of MEPs, of members of the European Parliament, that's called INTA. It's the International Trade Committee, and they are the only ones who have access to some negotiating text. And they have access to this text in reading rooms, where they can only themselves get in, have access to the text. Until the end of September this year, they couldn't even take notes. I don't know how you read a newspaper article, but when I want to understand something about newspaper article, I take notes, I take it home, I talk about it with my friends. None of this is possible with the text that our MEPs are supposed to oversight. Yeah, so the text is negotiated in Europe by the European Commission with a mandate from the European Council. I don't know, maybe some of us are not familiar with European institutions, but you have three institutions. You have the Council, that is the representative of member states. You have the Commission, that are unelected civil servants. And you have the Parliament, that are the people that you elect. So the Commission is negotiating this agreement in secret with the US. So what do we know despite the secrecy? So what we know is the mandate that the Council gave to the Commission. And how do we know it? Because it was leaked weeks ago, months ago. It was also published, but months later it was published in mid-October. So in this mandate, we know that TTIP is about removing tariffs, but there are very, very few tariffs between the US and EU. There are only tariffs on some agriculture products, which is a huge problem for some farmers and so on, but I won't really talk about that. Then there is the idea of liberalizing services, and the big question there is, are public services excluded? Are your school, your hospitals, any public services you can have in your country, are they excluded, or would they be liberalized?
Does liberalize mean privatized?
Well, it can be. It means
I
that,
don't know what it means.
well, it's not directly privatized, but it's a bit complicated, the service chapter, but hopefully I will talk about it later. It means mostly that it's open to companies, but that it doesn't mean that what is public now will automatically get privatized, but it means that they can enter the market, and it's not protected. You can't have a government monopoly, but it has huge impact on many things, because sometimes the funding of public services it requires that it's a monopoly. But we can discuss that.
Can you talk closer to the mic?
Yeah, sure. Then another thing we're learning with the mandate is that they want to lower what they call non-tariff barriers. This is a very crucial point, because all the gains that are supposed to come from TTIP are coming mostly from this point. Non-tariff barriers is what we call regulations, like the fact that you can have toxic chemicals, that you can have, what is in your food, what is in your data protection laws and everything. So what some entities in our societies consider as non-tariff barriers to trade are actually all the regulations that we choose democratically, which is why people are a bit annoyed by TTIP. Then another aim is to protect investments. And we talked about the word to protect, and that it's really to protect investments, and there are no other words to say it, but this is also a huge problem that I will talk about. And then there is this regulatory cooperation aim, which is to bring the regulatory system of the US and of the EU closer, so that trade between the two continents would be easier. And there are many ways to do that. You can make the regulation converge, you can harmonize them, and you can also make each side recognize the standards and the controls on the other side. There are also lots of other things. Okay, again, how do we know things about TTIP even though it's secret? It's because it's part of a global trend that has been going on for a long time and that is full of horrible acronyms. I thought about calling my talk Stop All These Stupid Acronyms. So WTO is the World Trade Organization and all the agreements that are in it. GATS is the WTO agreement on services. NAFTA is the agreement between the US, Canada, and Mexico. MAI is the multilateral agreement on investment, which was defeated in the late 90s. BITS is bilateral investment treaties. I will talk about it later. ACTA, you're familiar with it. EU-Singapore is the last agreement that was concluded by Europe. CETA is the agreement with Canada, and we now have the text. And the TPP is the huge agreement negotiated now in the Pacific. So I'm not just putting that to annoy you, I'm putting that because the only way we have to go around the secrecy is to really look, because it's the same people negotiating all these agreements, and what we expect is that what we find, what the positions that, for example, Europe is pushing in one agreement, or the positions that the US is pushing in one agreement, will be the basis of TTIP.
I think there's the one acronym is missing, and that's the collective name for all of these, that's WTF.
Okay, and the third source that we have is leaks, because we have quite a few. And there, yeah, when I do talks about trade agreements, I always say, thank you sources, if you're watching video, protect yourself, learn how to use some tools that are protecting you, like tapes, and to teach people how to use these tools, because even to leak things, they really need them. Okay, so now we are going to talk about the content. So which impact on free software and digital rights? Okay, so the first thing is data protection. because as you might know, the US kind of has an interest in not having data protection laws anywhere. And a good way to impose that to other countries is through trade agreements. So we have quite a few reasons to believe that it's something that the US would push. For example, discussions and talks by lobbyists and by members of the United States Trade Representatives. Europe said there won't be anything related to data protection in the agreement, but we expect data to come by the back door, for example, via an e-commerce chapter and via things like expressions like free flow of data and so on, that don't really relate exactly to private data, but will try to speak about other type of data and try to, well, in French we say to drown the fish. But that we have to be really, really careful that it doesn't come by a backdoor, because once it's in the agreement, it's there forever. And we have no idea what a piece of data will be in 20 years, where this agreement will still be there. So the position is that you don't touch data whatsoever anywhere in the agreement. We don't want it. Then there is, of course, an intellectual property chapter, and it's not me calling it an intellectual property chapter, but it's its name. And then in here I need to take my notes because there are lots of things in it. Okay. So what do we know about the future IP chapter of TTIP? So we know ACTA, we know what was in it. And we know also the IP chapter of the TPP, so the Trans-Pacific Partnership, this agreement in the Pacific, which was leaked and that is available via WikiLeaks. So I invite you to have a look at that. The EFF made lots of very good analysis of the text. There is in it everything we don't want, which is greater liability on internet intermediaries, more regulations on temporary copies, expanded copyright terms, a three-step language for again for copyright enforcement, criminal sanctions for copyright infringement, and so on. Everything that was in ACTA and that ACTA rejected. So this is something we don't really know what will be in TTIP, but we know that the US and other countries are pushing for it in other agreements. Europe says there won't be an ACTA number 2. The trust we can put in that is non-existent, and so we will need to be very careful. Just after the ACTA rejection, the leaked IP chapter of CETA, the EU-Canada agreement, was leaked. It was horrible. It was ACTA again. The final version, that we got 2 years later, of CETA's intellectual property chapter is not that bad. And so the question now is, did Canada fight back against EU demands, or did EU stop pushing for ACTA-like provisions after ACTA was rejected? This is a question. What we are sure of is that the US won't fight back against EU demands on harsher copyright infringement, that's for sure. So we will need to check, of course, this chapter with a lot of care. Yes.
This time a serious question. How do we know that the ideas for the IP chapter come from Europe and not from the other side of the pond?
We can't really know.
So, but because my question is, maybe it wasn't. So there is another possibility. You said that either Europe stopped fighting for it, or Canada fight against it. Maybe there's another possibility that Canada was the side that, because of some other agreements with the US, was trying to put the...
Well, I'm not sure about exactly. It's very hard to know what happens in a negotiation, and that's one of the huge problems why the opacity of the negotiation is terrible, because you can't put countries in front of their responsibilities. You can't challenge governments and say, you're my government, I didn't elect you to do that. So they're hiding behind each other, and it's very hard to know. That's why not having consolidated text and no access to negotiation is terrible. But Canada has a quite progressive legislation on copyright. Well, I'm not a specialist of copyright law in Canada, but it is much more progressive than the European one. So we can expect that it's Europe that's touched. So there was another leak of a more recent draft of the IP chapter of the TPP, so the Trans-Pacific one. It was 2 weeks ago. I didn't really have time to have a look at it, but the EFF analyzed all of it. And on the pad that I created, you have the links to all the analysis of the EFF. Okay, then we have the regulatory cooperation mechanism. It is something that is in the mandate, and it is something that lobbyists in Brussels are getting very excited about. So a good way to know what would be dangerous in trade agreements is to look at what lobbyists are excited about. They're very excited about that, which is, well, it's very hard to know what will really be in there, because it's something that doesn't really exist. But what we know is that there is a will to create a regulatory cooperation council that would be a weird body sitting somewhere in the middle of the Atlantic, in front of which all regulations should pass, even before they would go to elected parliaments, and then the stakeholders, which mostly mean the lobbies of the other party, which is American lobbies for European regulations and European lobbies for American regulations, but they're kind of the same, would have the right to look at this, have an early warning of regulations that might go against their interests, and might lobby even earlier to get rid of this regulation or water them down, even before the regulation actually goes in front of Parliament. So this is a big question how it will work, whether it will be that bad, whether there will be a democratic oversight and so on, but it's very hard to know, and it's hard to understand the use of this thing, but to give an early warning to corporate interests. Our American friends, because we're working very closely with the American civil society, compare it with the American regulatory agency, it's OIRA, I think, which is which they describe as a black hole in front of which all regulation pass and disappear or get watered down. So we can talk about that more afterwards, even though I'm not a super specialist of American policymaking. Anyway, it's seen by people working on this trade agreement as a very worrying trend, as a way also to push issues that are too touchy and that could make the deal rejected in front of Parliament, to push them to the future. And so instead of being directly in the agreement would be a living agreement, and which create institutions to increase the cooperation between the EU and US regulators, for the best or for the worst. But anyway, the contentious issues would be pushed back to this kind of institutions, with even less democratic control. Okay, then we come to the big piece that you might have heard of if you know TTIP. This is the thing that everyone gets super upset about, which is great, and which is the investment chapter. And especially this clause that is called investor-state dispute settlement. Okay, so how many of you know about that? Okay. Okay, so maybe we can go deeper later, but right now I won't talk about that. I will, because it is exactly how it works legally, and it's a bit too complicated. Right? Okay, so the problem with that, so this investment protections say that investors, like foreign investors, in this case American investors in Europe and European investors in the US, must have their investment protected, which means that which became a fact to, which became a way for investors to, no, I will explain the other way around. So, investments are protected in the agreement, and there is a way to make this protection enforced. And this is the investor-state dispute settlement mechanism. So what it is privatized courts with specialists that are for-profit arbitrators that are able to decide whether a policy by a government was against the interest of an investor, and whether the investment was hurt by the policy. So it was created 50 years ago. It's almost in all agreements, but now it's getting really criticized, because in the last years there was a huge rise in the number of cases about it, and also a lot of abuses of it. So it has been used in the last years to attack policies on tobacco control, on lots of environmental laws. For example, it has been used under NAFTA to sue Quebec for its moratorium on fracking. It has been used by Philip Morris to attack Australia and Ecuador against their plain packaging laws. It has been used by the Swedish company Veolia to attack Germany for 4.7 billion euro because they decided to stop using nuclear power. So, the number of cases is really rising, and even though the provision, like the investor-state mechanism, is not new, it's now used much more. It has lots of flaws that have become more and more discussed in the past month. So, as I say, the arbitrators are not judges; they are specialists. They are private lawyers. They get money by case. So the more they widen the interpretation of the clauses, the more cases they get, the more money they get. So of course, under the last years, the interpretation of the clauses of the investment protection chapters of free trade agreements has widened and widened and widened. Then they have a pretty much complete freedom of interpretation because there are no appeal courts. And also there is the possibility to have all the arbitration process completely secret. They don't have to make it public. I'll take your question at the end.
Yeah.
Then, of course, there is no democratic control because it's completely opaque, and there's almost no way to control these arbitrators. There is a huge chilling effect on regulations because even if states win the case, they never really win because only the investors have the power to sue states under this mechanism. So it's not a two-side thing with states being able to sue multinational corporations for their human rights abuses or whatever. It's a complete one-side process. And the cost of litigation is always bear by the parties. So it's in average 8 million euro per case, whether you win or lose, and therefore the states always lose. So it has a very strong chilling effect because in the last agreements that have been signed, it also applies to all levels of governance. So if you're a city, a province, or even a country, you might not want to pay around 8 million euro or up to several billions if you lose the case against a gigantic multinational corporation. So we have seen, for example, Canada has been attacked tens of times thanks to NAFTA Chapter 11, which has this provision, and has lost millions, not yet billions, of euros on many things. There has been cases on Canada banned some additive to gasoline that were toxic for people and were attacked by US petrol, gas, how do you say, oil companies. Also the moratorium on fracking and other cases that I will discuss later that touch other kind of regulations that are patents regulation and patent law, which of course is why it's important for free software. I'm coming to the free software part, don't worry. Yeah, what is also quite nice with this mechanism is that it's almost impossible once you sign when you sign an agreement that contains such clauses, it's almost impossible to get out. And of course it's your money because it's taxpayer money that is used to pay the companies. So there are very nice pictures of companies using the treasure of countries like ATM. Okay, so this is my wow. Okay, this is my favorite case. I like it very much. Well, this is about debt speculation. Like it's an investor that's speculating on Greek debt and that use ISDS to extort money from the Greek government, but I don't really have time to explain. But this is the most brilliant case because it's to explain that the investments that are covered are not. They are also just investing to build a power plant or whatever, but they are also speculating investments. I need to hurry up. Okay, so of course, all the things we want to see happening in this world around digital rights and policy related to free software can be harmed by these provisions. Of course, reforming patent law, intellectual property rights is one of the type of investments that is definitely covered by the chapter. So it definitely is covered, and country will be attacked for billions of euros if they reform their patent law. Same for copyright, same for DRM, same for net neutrality. Well, this is, I'm not so sure, but this is an interesting question. And privacy protection is also a question. Because of course, there will always be a multinational corporation or an investor from the other side of the Atlantic that loses money and loses profit if any of this provision of this reforms is undertaken. And again, even if at the end the state would win, they would never really win, and it will give the state a good reason to say, oh, I really can't reform patent law because I will get in trouble with foreign investors. So it's also giving excuses to states to not change laws that they really don't need because they already have no will to do it. So it's burdening us even more. And of course, everything else, you probably care about many other things than digital rights, but like environmental law, everything falls under it. Okay, I really don't have much time, but this is really my understanding of TTIP, is that the problem is not really its impact on any special sector, is that it touches the way we can make rules, regulations, laws in our societies, and therefore it really strongly reduces the policy space we will have. No matter what you care about, you will want to have policy changes, be it to renationalize or re-municipalize water services, be it to reform copyright, or to any policy thing that you would like to do will be probably making more difficult by TTIP. And I think this is a very, very terrible problem because, of course, the control you have over your life, and as a society, the control we have over the choices we can make as a society is what makes our freedom. So if this goes away because of free trade agreements our countries signed, then we're in trouble. Okay, so the question that everyone will be wondering about, why are they doing that? It's a very good question. I've been working full-time, or more than full-time, on TTIP for quite some time. I still don't have a satisfactory answer, really. I believe that they think that they're doing the right thing. No, really, because even the economic studies show that they're trying to get us out of the crisis by, they want to I didn't talk about that, but they want to really liberalize financial services, to deregulate even more financial services. How can it be that stupid? Like, how can it be that stupid? They really didn't understand anything about the crisis, and the way they say that they want to take out of the crisis is to produce more apples in the US and sell it in Europe, and do the contrary, and increase corporate capture of institutions. And okay, maybe we need corporations to create jobs, but okay, I don't think that's the right way to get out of the crisis. But if you have explanations, I'm really taking them. And if you have access to funding to fund my PhD on a study of people working in trade ministries and in the negotiators, then I'm really, I would love to take it, because I don't understand how these people can think this way. Okay, well, what they keep on saying is that we will have a lot of growth and jobs, it's going to be wonderful. Even their studies say that the gains will be really, really small. They are inside of the error margin, even though they're using the numbers in ways that are very close to pure lies. they're how do you say? They're using the numbers that are in the studies, but they're using them in ways that really don't make any sense if you actually read the study. Like, for example, they keep on saying that it's plus 0.5% that TTIP will bring to Europe, and then you realize that it's actually plus 0.5% of GDP growth in 2027. So this is lying. And even the studies they are basing their numbers on are full of flaws, and we can discuss that later, and has been criticized by many counter-studies. And actually, 2 days ago, another study by researchers at Tufts University say that there will be losses on everything, on GDP, on jobs, on... we can rediscuss that later. Okay, so now what can we do? There is a huge movement already built against TTIP. I don't know if you're aware of it. It is quite incredible, and all the people who've been working on trade policy for years are amazed. It's strong everywhere in Europe. We had the European Day of Action where 22 European countries participated, organized events. There are countries where the campaign is really, really strong. Like in the UK, it's really strong. It's the main issue is the NHS, the public services for health, and people are fighting to make sure that TTIP doesn't destroy their health service. In Germany, the movement is also absolutely huge. It was one of the main issues of the European election. There are petitions that have millions not millions, hundreds of thousands of people who signed them. There are actions everywhere. There is a European Citizen Initiative, self-organized European Citizen Initiative, which is a kind of super petition launched by groups in many, many member states that almost reached a million signatures in 2 weeks or something. So in Europe, the movement is really, really strong. Can I finish? Sorry. The European Parliament is putting lots of reservations and what they call red lines. ISDS, this investor state dispute settlement mechanism, might get ejected from TTIP, but it would still be in CETA. And the US and Canada corporate sectors are completely linked. So if we don't get it in TTIP, but we get it in CETA, then we are still in the same situation. This is just yeah, and in the US there is also quite a strong movement. It's more focused on the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, because the negotiations are more advanced. And there the campaign is mostly focused on fast track, which is the authority that the Congress gives the president to negotiate the free trade agreement, and then the Congress would just have a yes or no vote and will not reopen the negotiations. The president doesn't have this authority right now. The Congress has to give it. And the fight is on that, because if the president doesn't have fast track, then the US trade representative cannot negotiate, because everything they might negotiate might get changed by the Congress later. But the campaign is really big, and also the digital rights people and the EFF and so on are really active in the campaign. What is quite incredible, and what is it feels so good to work on TTIP and on trade policy, is that civil society is united, like really united. If you're working on that, you were working next to farmers, next to people working on financial regulation, next to trade unionists, and and people working on toxic chemicals and anti-fracking groups and whatever. Groups that are usually not really talking to each other are actually all united because the thing is so bad that it managed to unite everyone. So we can be hopeful. It still needs to get bigger. There are countries where there is no movement, like Sweden, for example. But the ratification will not happen before months or even years. The ratification of the CETA, which is already concluded, will not happen before months or years, and the conclusion of the TTIP also will not happen before years. So we have lots of time to create an even better movement, but it's kind of time to care about trade policy because the momentum is so strong. For those who might be a bit familiar with the protests that are already happening against TTIP, we are always linking TTIP with CETA and TISA. CETA, I talked about a little bit, is the EU-Canada agreement. And the problem of CETA is that we see it as the Trojan horse of TTIP because, once again, the economy of Canada and the US are so close. So we are trying to link TTIP and CETA all the time because the ratification of CETA will come before. And TISA is the other agreement we try to talk about a lot, and it's also negotiated right now. It's in the Trade in Services Agreement. There are lots of worrying things in it. That it's also completely secret. It's negotiated between 50 countries. It's a plurilateral agreement in the margins of the WTO. What is terrible in it is the effect on public services and the locking that we will have because of it, the locking in privatizations and so on. Then there was a chapter on financial services that was leaked by WikiLeaks, showing that TISA will also bring more deregulation of the financial services. And in this chapter of financial services, there was this reference to free flows of data. So we're really worried that TISA would also be used to enshrine in international trade laws some provisions that are making regulations on data protection more difficult. If I speak too quickly, I see some of you a little bit confused, but I can answer any questions actually. Yeah, thank you. Then, as you might have understood, I find this very exciting and very terrible, and I'm at the same time angry and fascinated by these trade agreements. So here are some questions that I'm personally really wondering about, and I hope you will also be wondering about, because we need to think about these things and not just be scared or whatever. So it's just some suggestions of questions, and then we can actually discuss other questions. Yeah, no, but really, what are they doing? Why are they doing that? So I think it's a real question that we should all think about, because if we're living in democracies, then that should not happen. Who is there, by the way? I think it's a very good question also. Because who is negotiating that, and in the interest of who? And this is a fundamental question. Is it us? Like, is it our governments? Is it the parliaments? It's none of that. It's people who are not elected, and we are not sure at all how accountable they are to parliaments and people.
Who elects them, or who gives them the job?
Okay, it depends. In Europe, the negotiators are civil servants. So you have all the recruitment processes of the European Commission that are very clear and transparent, and you can look them up. In the US, I don't know. What I put in the pad are some articles about revolving door cases and studies about the links between multinational corporations and the lobbyists and the civil servants, and studies about how they basically go to private sector and then public sector and private sector and public sector, which might give us hints about why they're doing that. It's a question. I put articles in the pad and I'll let you make up your own mind. And in the US, I don't really know how it works, the trade representatives. And who gives these people authority is the member states in Europe. So they all negotiate everything through the mandate and what they're supposed to be following the orders of the member states. Who elects the governments of the member states is the people, but the chain is so far away that I really think that we have absolutely no control on the positions that our states are taking in the council, and the council is a very opaque institution that we can discuss that for 2 hours also, how opaque and undemocratic it is in Europe.
Can I just short follow up? Is there any accountability between these people and the political parties or the council that is the highest representatives of the governments? Is there any direct link to the
There
party?
are no direct links.
They're just employees.
All the agreements have to be ratified. So what the Commission always says is that the orders are given by people who have been elected, and the ratification will be made by people who were elected, for example, in the European Parliament. But what happens in between is very complicated, and I can also explain why ratification of trade agreements is usually super easy, because since the MEPs, the member of the European Parliament or member of any parliaments, have no possibility to change the text, they just don't read it. They have no idea what is in it, and it's an incredible complexity. I have some chapters of some trade agreements. The complexity is really incredible. So they don't understand it, and without a strong movement, they don't care about it, and they only have a yes or no vote. And the commission or the governments are just coming to them and say, plus 2 million jobs or and lots of numbers and so on, and how can they vote against it? And for NAFTA, it was also said by the American government mostly that there would be a bazillion job created, which did not happen, and it passes. ACTA was one of the first trade agreements that was actually rejected because of the huge movement, but hopefully that made people aware of trade policy and it will get better in the future.
But can't we use NAFTA as as an example of saying, well, it didn't work for them. Why should this work now?
We're using it a lot, but the studies about NAFTA are really contested, and what is incredible about macroeconomic studies of these trade agreements that no one agrees. Like the people who are in favor of them will prove you with numbers that it created millions of jobs, and the people who are against say it distracted all the family farming, it destroyed all the small industry, it was horrible for SMEs, lots of jobs were lost, entire regions were divested. But you can make the numbers say whatever you want. And even for TTIP, there are lots of different studies, and they all come to dramatically different results. So then you need to read them and to understand them and to make up your own mind, but it's very complicated. Yeah.
Can you perhaps explain to the public why the self-organized initiative to stop TTIP is there and why it's not an ECI?
Yeah, I will do that. I just finished quickly because it's something that I found very important. Yeah, is that I mostly showed what I find terrible about it. There are people who have dramatically different discourse on it, and I really encourage you to have a look at what the other says, and also the rebuttals. There are articles written all the time from each side criticizing the other side point. So really, this is a complex matter, and I clearly showed my opinion on all these issues, but please research. And to answer your question, so a European Citizen Initiative is a very weird thing. It's a petition for which you need to ask the body that you're petitioning, which is the European Commission, to give you approval for you to be able to do your petition. So this is very strange. But there are lots of problems with it, like the fact that even if you manage to get what you're supposed to get, which is 1 million signatures around Europe and quorums in at least 7 countries. So each country has a quorum, and you have to meet it at least 7 countries with 1 million signatures in overall to be able for the Commission to really look at your thing and maybe at the end say, yeah, sure, I don't care. So there was one launched to ask for to put a stop to the TTIP negotiations and to also not conclude CETA. It was not accepted by the European Commission after a very long campaign, a lot of resources from the movement after the movement put a lot of resources in this process. So it was rejected, but the alliance of more than 230 organizations across Europe decided to attack the decision of the European Commission in front of the European Court of Justice, and also to organize a self-organized ECI with the Reclaim Democracy slogan and so on. So this was launched less than around 2 weeks ago, and it is really incredible to see the number of signatures because they are now around 750,000, less than 2 weeks after. And unfortunately, I think we need to finish. But I would be super happy to answer any question. And I put lots of documents in the pad, including many links to articles exploring the link between digital rights and all the copyright, patent issue, and so on, and trade agreements. Thank you very much.